welcome to this session on sociology of tourism. In this session, we shall take into context the cross-sectional study of tourism from the perspective of sociology. We shall begin by an introduction to sociology as a subject, take into consideration the implications of sociology of tourism and how it could contribute to bring more clarity on the impacts of tourism on a society. Now, sociology is the study of social life, social change, and the social causes and consequences of human behavior. It is the study of groups and group interactions, societies and societal interactions, from small and personal groups to very large groups. A group of people who live in a defined geographic area, who interact with one another and who share a common culture is what sociologists call a society. Sociologists study all aspects and levels of a society. Sociologists investigate the structure of groups, organizations and societies and how people interact within these contexts. Sociology is also defined as the general science of society. Let us now take a look at how sociology and leisure are interrelated. So, sociology of leisure or leisure sociology is the study of how humans organize their free time. Leisure includes a broad array of activities such as sports, tourism, and the playing of games. The sociology of leisure is closely tied to the sociology of work, as each explores a different side of the work-leisure relationship. More recent studies in the field move away from the work-leisure relationship and focus on the relationship between leisure and culture. Sociology of leisure is a fairly recent subfield of sociology compared to the more traditional subfields such as sociology of work, sociology of the family, and the sociology of education. It saw most of its development in the second half of the 20th century. Until then, leisure had often been seen as a relatively unimportant minor feature of society. Leisure is now recognized as a major social institution deserving of serious sociological inquiry, particularly in Western societies. As John Wilson and others have noted, it is difficult to define leisure. Its definitions are numerous and often mutually contradictory. For example, as a discrete portion of one's time or as a quality of experience irrespective of time. Geoffroy Dumazedaire distinguished four distinct definitions of leisure, which begin broadly and gradually narrow in scope. The first and broadest defines leisure as a style of behavior that may occur even at work. The second defines it as any non-work activity. The third further excludes family and household obligations, and finally, the narrowest defines leisure as activities dedicated to self-fulfillment. One of the most preferred leisure activity when supported by availability of time and purchasing power is definitely tourism. So let us take a look at the sociology of tourism. This is an emergent specialty concerned with the study of touristic motivations, roles, relationships, and institutions, and of their impact on tourists and on the societies who receive them. The scientific studies of tourism originated in continental Europe, which was the first region to experience the impact of mass tourism. The Italian El Bodio published the first social scientific article on the subject in 1899. Ogilvie's book on tourism, published in 1933, is the first social scientific treatise on the subject in English. The study of tourism as a sociological specialty rather than merely as an exotic, marginal topic emerged only in the 1970s. With Cohen's typological essay published in 1972 and McCannell's first theoretical synthesis published in 1973. Since the mid-1970s, the field has grown rapidly. As international tourism expands to the remotest corners of the world, often tourist roles overlap with travel, business, education, intellectual interests, cultural motivations, and other social domains. Modern tourism has institutionalized both the tourist as well as commercialized services that are used in the pursuit of tourism. Because tourism often combines with other complex motivation, expectations and behavior, the sociology of tourism combines both theoretical and empirical attempts to understand how tourists and tourism during a temporary stay often carry over attitudes, expectations and behavior that has been their norm at the place of residence or at work. The sociology of tourism has therefore helped to establish the study of tourists and tourism as an independent field of inquiry rather than looking at these issues as offshoots of mainstream sociology. Modern tourism is complex because it has an international dimension, has institutional links and specialized organizational and entrepreneurial roles, and involves governments, trade associations, airlines, hotels and resorts, agents and operators, support services and ancillary services like food, drink, shopping, guides, etc. Tourists consume all these products and services by passing through the system of organizations, enterprises and government, as well as interacting with waiters, shopkeepers, entertainers and people both in the private and public spheres. So, sociology of tourism helps us to analyze the impact of an individual passing through a system as well as a large number of tourists, establishes the transformational impact of tourism on people, places and communities and their way of life. We can also understand the tourist, the tourism system and the host population. Each have their own relationship with the perception of an international economy and a national context. We can therefore study any of these issues in tourism from sociological approaches. Now, these approaches could be individual, they could be interactional, destinational and historical. Let us take a look at the individual approach. In this, the focus is on the tourist as a unique individual unit. The aspects taken into account are motivation, quality of experience and propensity as indicators to travel. We can look at the nature of individuals and the issues their existence in modern society cause, like routine, boredom, lack of meaning in what they do, etc. The individual approach stresses what in the tourism jargon may be treated as the push factor. Destinations and people exercise pull factors, and depending on the approach of the researcher, which may follow a pro or anti-tourism orientation or may be neutral to tourism, the pull and push factors would be given a certain matching weightage. Alternatively, sociologists could approach the question of the unique individual and his experience from the point of view of a guest or search for the real. Here, the artificiality of one's life is willfully abandoned in the process of tourism as a sacred journey to find authenticity is staged by the tourism product designers. According to McCannell, this creates a spurious tourist space. This approach emerges from the center-periphery model, which is generally used to explain the spatial expansion of tourism from the industrial regions of the world out to the agricultural or backward regions. Today, tourism seeks the strange and the other. Where it is possible to see a vanishing lifestyle, this quest defines the modern tourist as a secular pilgrim and the tour as a sacred journey, which requires a break from the ordinary life. The next approach is the interactional. Since the marketing concept drives the tourism industry, much of sociology of tourism really tries to justify the needs of the industry and the tourism exchange. Stutton in 1767 said that it is perhaps one of the few who examined these tourism encounters. These brief meetings are often on unequal terms and generally at the symbolic level. Greenwood in 1972 and Cohen in 1988 have studied this concept in relation to folk cultures, festivals, rituals and prostitution to show the brief nature of contact encourages commercialization or commodification. The types of tourists can therefore be determined by their sense of involvement, the scope of their understanding, and their desire to follow up on the encounter. Such studies assumes that locals are attracted to tourists in the beginning because they assume that the keenness to develop personal relationships is a sign of friendliness. However, on closer inspection, such keenness is really motivated by material gains or money earned or even taken under false pretenses. The novelty of the foreigner in terms of skin and hair color, dress and social codes cannot sustain friendly feelings on one's either side unless there is some common objective to be shared by the tourist and the resident. The role of taxi drivers, shopkeepers, guides and touts ensure that the mask that protects the locals from the tourist gaze remains firmly in place. The tourist gaze also reduces the encounter to the most superficial level because the tourist is also colored by preconceptions of his work and the value of his money. Destinational approach. Tourism transforms a destination. Resort areas generally do not have an extremely well-developed local economy. Islands and mountains are dependent on external resources, and yet the service sector demands a certain level of development. Whilst the low-budget tourists accustomed to shortages and inconvenience may tolerate uneven development, the high-spender tourists will not. Butler in 1980 and Greenwood in 1972 have looked at this aspect of transformation in terms of phases or stages, including investment, creation of facilities, expansion of individual and mass tourism, or cycles, including discovery, development, popularity, and decline. The important aspect of all these approaches is that they indicate how the destination, as it comes under the control of an industry, slowly loses its autonomy and comes under the control of the outsiders. The destination becomes vulnerable to forces like trends in fashions, political and economic forces, and negative image formation. Now, the historical approach. Tourism is making the world a smaller place. The few authentic sites have become World Heritage Sites or living museums. As the postmodern age is creating small islands of tourism, museumization removes nature and culture from the control of those who were a part of biosphere or ecosystem and turns indigenous people into outsiders. Tourists then become the conservationists who protect a living culture from the progress of life itself. For example, in Pennsylvania in the 18th century, communities have been established as tourist attractions where people live and work, dress as they did 200 years ago. Even animal species have been engineered to look as they did at that time. This is authentic heritage to serve, whereas others would consider such constructions of history somewhat fantastic. These parks and amusement parks reflect the wish fulfillment and fantasy that many tourists enjoy these days. This makes ordinary life more bearable and brings illusions within the grasp of an office secretary or an automobile worker. The postmodern tourist is stimulated by an attraction that can transgress the limits of possibilities and reality. According to Eric Cohen, the growing strength of this broad historical trend will significantly transform the modern tourist system. This transformation will perhaps be the biggest challenge to the destination planner and the researcher who will have to evaluate the transformational role of tourism in this new stage. Asian countries have come to terms with these trends by redecorating their royal residences and displaying a sense of visual pageantry that perhaps contradicts with their poverty. Let us take a look at the conceptualizations and theoretical approaches. P.L. Pierce in 1982 has studied people's conception of tourist-related roles empirically. From the studies carried forward after his extensive contributions to this field, a variety of conceptual approaches can be derived. We shall now take a look at some of the most widely acknowledged approaches from the point of view of sociology of tourism. The first is tourism as commercialized hospitality. Considers touristic process as a commercialization of the traditional guest-host relationship through which strangers were given a temporary role and status in the society they visited. Tourism is thus viewed as a commercialized and eventually industrialized form of hospitality. This approach proved fruitful in studying the evolutions and dynamics of relationships between tourists and locals and in analyzing conflicts within roles and institutions dealing with tourists. The second, tourism as a modern leisure activity. According to P.L. Pierce's work in 1982, tourism is seen as a type of leisure and the tourist as a person at leisure who also travels. This approach, however, abstains from investigating the deeper cultural significance of leisure activities. The third approach, tourism as a modern variety of the traditional pilgrimage. This perspective focuses on the deeper structural significance of modern tourism and identifies it with pilgrimages in traditional societies. It was proposed by McCannell in 1973 and Gabon in 1977. The fourth approach is tourism as an expression of basic cultural themes. The emphasis here is on the deeper cultural meaning of tourism. This approach would eventually do away with tourism as an analytical concept and would lead to a comparative study of different culture-specific varieties of travel. The fifth is tourism as an acculturation process. Proponents of this viewpoint focus upon the effects that tourists have on their hosts and strive to integrate the study of tourism into the wider framework of the theory of acculturation as proposed by Nunes in 1963. The sixth approach is tourism as a type of ethnic relations. This advocates to integrate the analysis of the tourist-host relationships into the wider field of ethnicity and ethnic relations. The seventh approach is tourism as a form of neocolonialism. The focus is on the role of tourism in creating dependencies between tourism generating, that is the metropolitan countries, and tourism receiving, or the peripheral nations that replicate colonial or imperialistic forms of domination and structural underdevelopment. This approach has explicitly formulated in a paper by Nash in 1977. The principal issue areas in the sociology of tourism is the next topic to be covered. Sociological research on tourism fall naturally into four principal issue areas: the tourist, relationship between tourists and the locals, the structure and functioning of the tourist system, and the consequences of tourism. The tourist. Research on the tourist is extremely varied, but the bulk of work in this area consists of purely empirical surveys and trend analysis that are oriented towards meeting the practical needs of governments and the tourist industry. They deal primarily with the demographic and socio-economic characteristics of tourists, the frequency, purpose, length and type of trip, and the nature of tourist destinations and the kind of activities undertaken. Though of rather limited sociological relevance in themselves, such data are important resources for secondary analysis, enabling scholars to identify the major trends in modern tourism. International tourism became a major modern mass phenomena after the World War II, when it came to embrace practically all social classes in industrialized Western societies. This expansion was made possible by rising standards of living and the shortening of work hours. They have also been accompanied by longer paid vacations in the industrialized Western countries and a rapid improvement in the means of transportation. The socio-psychological study of tourism has only recently come to the attention of professional psychologists. Several topics have been closely examined: motivation, the culture or environment, shock experienced at the destination, and decision-making process have been widely dealt with. The attitudes and mutual perceptions of tourists and locals have been studied primarily from the locals' perspective. there is little reliable information on the impact of touring on the tourist. PLPS suggests, on the basis of these meager evidences, that tourists do develop more positive attitudes to their host as a consequence of their travelling. But he also thinks that holiday experience tend to confirm pre-existing attitudes. This could be negative as well as positive. Droxy in 1976 proposed a general evolutionary model of change in local attitudes towards tourists, consisting of 4 stages: euphoria, apathy, annoyance, and antagonism. A positive attitude towards tourism may indeed accompany the initial stages of its development, but antagonism is certainly found in many touristic areas, particularly where tourist destinations have increased rapidly, and the tourist industry has caused more barriers in the socio-economic and cultural differences between locals and tourists, or endangered competition over scarce local resources. The impact of tourism. This by far is the most intensively researched issue areas within the sociology of tourism. The great bulk of the impact studies focus on the host community or society. The effect on the tourist's country of origin is neglected. The socio-economic studies cover primarily 8 major topics: foreign exchange, income, employment, prices, the distribution of benefits, ownership and control, development, and government revenue. There is considerable agreement on the impact tourism has on them. It is well established that tourism generates foreign exchange income for the host country and employment for the local population. Tourism often becomes an important source of governmental revenue, as well as which may be one of the reasons why many governments are eager to encourage its rapid development. Nonetheless, the positive economic effects of tourism frequently fail significantly short of expectations or predictions. In those cases when small-scale, locally owned, lower-standard craft tourism is slowly introduced into a less developed context, gross earnings may be smaller, but a greater percentage will be locally retained and there will be fewer disruptive effects. There is a better chance that linkages with the local economy will be established. The socio-cultural impacts of tourism are numerous and varied, but most of them can be classified under one of the 10 major topics: community involvement in wider framework, the nature of interpersonal relations, the basis of social organization, rhythm of social life, migration, the division of labor, stratification, the distribution of power, deviance and customs, and the arts. There is a broad agreement among scholars on the findings about most of these topics. Tourism's major impact on the basis of social organization, particularly in simple and traditional societies, consists of an expansion of the economic domain. Some areas of life that were not primarily regulated by economic criteria became commercialized or commoditized. Moreover, consideration of economic gain take a more prominent place in locals' attitudes and relationships, not only in their dealings with tourists but also among themselves. Many researchers have noted the impact that tourism has on the rhythm of social life. Tourism is a highly seasonal activity that drastically affects the traditional way of life in agricultural communities. It also changes daily division of time between work and leisure for employees in the industry, which may in turn affect family life. Tourism creates new employment opportunity in the host area and hence influences migration patterns in 2 principal directions. It helps the community retain members who would otherwise migrate away, particularly unemployed or underemployed youths in economically marginal areas such as islands or mountains. But it also attracts outsiders who are searching for work or economic opportunity and who often come from other branches of the economy, particularly agriculture. By creating new kinds of employment, tourism draws into the labor force parts of the local population previously outside it, specifically young women who now find employment in tourist services such as hotels, in the production of crafts and souvenirs for the market, or in tourism-oriented prostitution. This change in turn affects not only the division of labor within the household but also the status of women, via their families and husbands, and the control of parents over children. It occasionally leads to increased conflicts and deviance within the family. Tourism is not a particularly effective mechanism of social mobility. While some individuals may greatly benefit from rank and file employees of the industry have limited chances for advancement due to the peculiar employment structure. It has a broad base of unskilled and semi-skilled workers and narrow upper echelons. Moreover, in poorly developed areas, these echelons tend to be occupied by outsiders to the detriment of local employees. Tourism does, however, encourage new economic activities in ancillary and complementary services and thus indirectly creates new opportunities for economic mobility among the locals. Let us take a look at the impact of tourism on customs and the arts. Customs and arts are frequently drawn into the economic domain or commoditized as resources to encourage tourism. Commoditization does not in itself necessarily change customs or the arts. Indeed, in some instances, it may conserve them in the interest of tourism. Tourism has often been presented as a major debaser and destroyer of customs and the arts that leads to the emergence of phony folk culture, according to the words of Foster in 1964. In conclusion, rather than looking at transformations engendered by tourism in customs and the arts as mere aberrations, it is more useful to approach them as another accelerated stage in the continuous process of cultural change. It presently gives rise to a variety of traditional arts created for the tourist market and meriting attention on their own terms as genuinely new artistic creations. Finally, let us take a look at the scope of sociology of tourism. Mainstream sociology has only recently discovered tourism as a field of systematic industry. A variety of often intriguing conceptual and theoretical approaches for studying the complex and manifold touristic phenomena have emerged. For example, tourism as an irritant and a negative form of socialization, which is seen in the works of Brostein and Turner and Ash in the year 1975. Second, tourism as a normal social phenomena where the author, according to McCannell, is neutral and studies the merits and demerits in a balanced way to create a typology of tourism as well as of tourists. Third, there is a change from looking at tourism in terms of other social concepts and categories and individual psychological motives to looking at tourism in terms of the tourists or the hosts. The tourists or hosts' own concepts and categories are significant expressions of social symbols to which they attach meaning. Fourth, another aspect is from the topologies of tourists and tourism to look at significant differences between tourists and types of tourism. This includes to see why tourism is good at an early stage and bad at another, or why its impact can cause social and economic transformations, cultural revivals or distress. Cohen in 1972 and Smith in 1977 have made such differing impact studies which are of particular interest to destinations that wish to employ tourism as a tool for development. Let us now sum up this session. The tourism industry as well as the government must provide incentives for sociological research in tourism. Such studies would help in the planning and development of sustainable tourism. They might also provide clues to resolve contradictions or settle the problems that have started emerging at various destinations. Thank you for your patient listening.